events are really fast moving, so I should tell our listeners we're recording on Tuesday afternoon and we'll come on to the NATO summit and Keir Starmer's defence spending pledge later. But first of all, let's just go over what's been happening. I mean, Freddie, for about an hour this morning, it looked as if things had de-escalated, hadn't it? It seemed briefly like Trump's announcement of a ceasefire had worked. Can you sort of take us through the roller coaster of his announcement and what happened next?
Yeah, so he posted on Truth Social last night that there was this ceasefire. He announced it with his characteristic triumphalism. And reports then came out later in the night, early this morning, that there were alarms and sirens going off in northern Israel, suggesting that Iranian strike was inbound, to which the Israeli defense minister said that they were going to respond. Axios has reported today that Trump actually spoke to Netanyahu last night and tried to get him to withdraw that attack. Netanyahu said it's too late, the planes are in the air, and we saw some further posts from Trump today about please don't bomb Iran, please call the planes back. It seems that there was one missile that Israel landed in Iran when the original plan was for a much greater strike. So there is a question here about, was Trump able to stop Israel? Did Netanyahu ignore him? Yet again, it's always about this personal relationship between Netanyahu and Trump. At the moment, it seems like we've gone back to the ceasefire. Maybe it will hold, maybe it won't. But you have to remember that Trump's often said that there would be ceasefires or the ceasefires on the brink in Ukraine, and there's been other situations in the past where he's made these large celebratory statements and they've not really borne out in reality. So we don't yet know. I think we can talk about it a bit later, whether this is a success, because obviously yesterday we looked like we were on a different path. It looked like things were going to get worse. Escalation looked inevitable. We had the Iranian strike on the US Army base in Qatar. But for the moment, Trump seems to have tried, potentially, let's see, to have drawn a line under it.
Yeah, and this is what I wanted to ask you, Megan, actually, because you saw Trump's fury there. I mean, we were talking about it in the office, weren't we? He's actually, for all his bombast, a man
loud,
who... Yeah, I mean, he's a man who rarely swears, actually. So, is this because he's so furious? Because he's being shown up? Are Israel's actions a sign of American weakness?
I mean, it just shows you how quickly things can change. So 48 hours ago, Trump's giving a televised address where he's just praising Netanyahu, referring to him as Bibi, saying we're in this together. Netanyahu saying Trump is our greatest friend. And now we have Trump openly swearing, shouting Israel down, basically, via reporters. I think since October 7th, Netanyahu has always made a gamble that the U.S. will back them publicly, no matter what goes on behind the scenes. I mean, Netanyahu has always had a very hostile, aggressive relationship behind the scenes with American presidents. I mean, we have the reports that way back is Clinton storming out of meetings saying, who's the fucking superpower around here? But publicly, most American presidents have definitely held their tongue, been very, positive about the relationship.
Yeah.
Trump is a kind of different kettle of fish. He's never been known to, hide his real feelings. And I think we saw that this morning.
It's really interesting. And is there a path to de-escalation? Freddie, you were suggesting that it looked like, I mean, now, as of the time of recording, we don't know what's going to happen next. It looks like there's a potential that it could hold. I mean, Netanyahu said Israel has hit a radar station near Tehran in response to the apparent ceasefire violation, but has refrained from further attacks.
Yeah, I think the most important thing is what happens in Iran. The Economist had a good piece out today about how the mullahs in Iran have been shunted to the side. They've not seen the Ayatollah much over this conflict. It seems like the Revolutionary Guard, which was set up to protect the revolution in 79 and has a huge amount of power within the country, both economically, they are a sort of a country within a country in many ways, and militarily. It seems that many of the generals of the Revolutionary Guard were killed, and some of the more hardliners within that organization have stepped up, and they're much more skeptical about any negotiation, any diplomacy with the US. So I think for now it seems like there's this ceasefire, but there's this broader question about well, how does Iran see itself in relation to both the survival of the regime and also in terms of its nuclear weapon? There has been some suggestions. Antony Blinken wrote a piece in the New York Times this morning, slightly going down this line, that they could take time to rebuild, and the incentives have now shifted because they saw what happened to Saddam Hussein, they saw what happened to Gaddafi, and certain people in the foreign elite, the Washington establishment, have said that, of course, this makes nuclear armament much more attractive because the regime is at such a risk now of collapsing. So are they going to rush for a bomb, essentially? Are they going to use some of those enriched uranium supplies that we don't really know where they are and how much there is left? Are they going to use that to try and push ahead and protect the regime? So yes, okay, there is this ceasefire. Trump might post on True Socialist, he did say that they will never get a nuclear weapon, but there is internal politics within Iran which suggests that might not happen down the line.
Right. And what does this mean for sort of the people in Iran, Megan? We're getting reports out that they are fearing what their leaders might do next. The regime obviously has this terrifying track record of human rights abuses. What are you hearing out of the country? Yeah,
I mean, I want to say what Freddie's saying is like a very serious concern, the fact that the hardliners within the regime, the generals have really kind of taken power. Right. That's really tipped the balance of power. And we saw a lot of what Netanyahu was encouraging on social media with his direct messages to the Iranian people and some of Trump's suggestions as well. They were kind of trying to, encourage the people of Iran to rise up and challenge their regime. That hasn't really been happening. There hasn't been a groundswell of pushback to the regime. Being bombed has really rallied the people around their government. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I think we probably will avoid in the short term a really violent crackdown on civil society. But what really happens in the future is really hard to say because, as you say, the really hardliner, much less
amenable, if that's the right word. If you could ever call the mullahs amenable.
Exactly. But, we could see, some really terrifying crackdown in the future.
Yeah. Okay. And just going back to Trump before we go on to the sort of wider response from the UK and Europe, is there some scenario where it looks like he's actually played a blinder by deciding to strike those sites in Iran if the ceasefire holds?
Yeah, potentially. I mean, again, the Blinken piece, Antony Blinken, obviously part of the Biden administration, not in government at the moment. Yeah. He said that I didn't support the strikes, but I hope that they've achieved what they tried to achieve, which I think is an interesting way of framing it. Now we're 2 days in or 3 days into US involvement in this war. You can obviously only hope for a ceasefire to come out of that. And if they have degraded the nuclear facilities in Iran, okay, well, that's obviously a positive if you're going to go for the strike in the first place. Could he have played a blinder completely? And then if we look at the domestic politics, it's already turning. We spoke about last week the split within the movement, and I think that split is still there very much so. But in terms of the publicity side of things and Trump being able to claim that he is still the president of peace and he is the one that gets a ceasefire after the 12-day war, as he puts it, that will help him in the short term. Let's see how it goes. I mean, as we've already said, we don't know how Iran is eventually going to respond and whether this ceasefire will hold. There's already been broken in some respect. So let's see. But yes, of course. I mean, if this is it, then all of the premonitions, the predictions about full US engagement in the Middle East yet again won't come to pass because the ceasefire will hold.
Yeah, I have a slightly different perspective than Freddie. While I have no doubt that Trump, no matter what happens, will proclaim victory and say this was a great decision, I think there's a lot of factors that it's still so volatile. There's so many, unexpected outcomes that could arise from this. But one thing that's already clear, I think, is that the hardliners in all countries are now emboldened. That's happening in Iran. We've just discussed. Netanyahu and the hardliners in his government have learned that Trump, maybe against his own regional interests, will back Israel. So he doesn't really have to worry about that. He could strike again, thinking that the US will once again come and align with them. And then the neocons in the US, the pro-war faction has really kind of, crush the isolationist
Well, maybe.
side of
let's
MAGA.
see. Lindsey Graham, the senator, was calling for regime change, and if there is a ceasefire, that's not going to happen, right? So many of them wanted Israel and the US to go even further, completely take out the regime and install. Well, they obviously never said what they would want to install afterwards, but that was the suggestion. So Trump seems to not want to go that far. So I completely agree. The neocons have had a good week, as it were, in terms of winning the ear of the White House. But it's not. They're not necessarily going to achieve what they wanted to achieve, and as they stated in recent days. Unless
Trump does get dragged in further.
Maybe. Yeah, we don't know.
So while tension continues in the Middle East, leaders are gathering at The Hague for the NATO summit as we record. Freddie, what outcome are you expecting there, if anything?
Well,
sorry to make you predict.
We seem to be doing a lot of that. Well, it's only a 2-day summit. It's in The Hague, as you said. The actual time for talking seems to be restricted to around 2.5 hours. There's a dinner with royalty, which Trump will obviously love, but it doesn't seem to be that substantive. The main thing that has come out of it, which was sort of agreed at the weekend, was this commitment to a 5% defense spending pledge. We should see this in the broader framework of Trump trying to get NATO to focus on Europe, essentially, by trying to take American troops out, or at least have their focus shift to the Indo-Pacific. And he's asking them to step up. And this is yet another example of European nations realizing that Trump means what he says, and they have to increase their spending. So that's how I would see it. I mean, obviously, NATO was set up to counter the Soviet Union. Iran doesn't traditionally fall within that. I mean, there was some talk at previous NATO summits about including China in communiques and what have you. I think if we look at the communique, let's see what it says. But I would predict maybe that we're going to see an entrenchment of that, shift away from global politics and a much greater focus on European.
Yeah, okay. Because Keir Starmer has pledged to spend 5% of GDP on defence by 2035, along with other NATO members. I mean, it always sort of makes me feel very cynical when I see announcements like this, because, by 2035, it's a long way away. Things can change. I mean, how significant are pledges like that, really?
I mean, it is significant in the fact that he's committing to it. I mean, we just saw just a few months ago, he, made the move to commit to 3.5, which was a huge step change. So now you can just see how serious every European leader now is about really wanting to ensure that Trump does not remove U.S. security guarantees. So this is kind of a rallying effect where they all want to present unity and placate Trump, essentially.
Yeah.
How likely is it to actually happen? That's a completely different story. We're talking about 10 years in the future. It's really unclear how they're even really possibly going to get to 3.5. So 5% is just a kind of a fantasy figure at this moment. I don't know if you have
there's a couple of things going on there, I suppose. We need to placate Trump, as you say. So let's say we're going to do 5% because that's what he's asked us to do.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, there is a real increase in defence spending, which you're seeing around Europe. And then there is, in the long term, as you say, are we going to be able to get there? And I agree, Anoosh, it feels a little bit immaterial at this point. I mean, it's funny as well. I mean, if you look at, for instance, UK economic growth in the past 2 years, it's essentially been stagnant. Therefore, I always feel that the percentage figure of GDP feels a little bit irrelevant, because it doesn't actually, it's not speaking about a real figure, the actual figure that goes to the military. And then there's a broader point, I suppose, about has rearmament become the defining mission of Keir Starmer's government? Is this something that he also needs to tell a story on, bring people around? There's going to be, if they do achieve it, and as Megan said, they've already announced the 3.5% and they've laid out some spending plans to get there. They've not, in this announcement, laid out how they're going to get to 2035 and the 5% rather than the 3.5%. But if they are going to do that eventually, there are going to be some difficult decisions, and it's just yet another ratchet in the pressure on Rachel Reeves, the pressure on the Treasury, the pressure on their focus on their OBR obsession. And I think that it's going to play a much greater role in domestic politics than it has already. I mean, the debate politically in the UK so far has been much more focused on the tax and spend, the welfare reforms, the tax rises we had in the first budget and the spending review. at some point, and David Lammy's spoken about this before, about how Labour foreign policy is intricately related to domestic politics, I think that's only going to increase.
Yeah.
And you probably are going to have to see the government make a much greater or put much more effort into explaining to the public why that is, who we actually focused on.
Yeah.
And what I find really interesting about the strategic review that came out last year was that they finally admitted that we should be focusing on the European security theatre, something that Jeremy Cliff, actually, our old colleague, used to argue for quite a lot, rather than the Indo-Pacific. And I think that sort of fits in with what Trump is saying, and Labour seem to be, at least on a theoretical basis, on a principle basis, aligned with what Trump's saying.
Yeah, it's a funny kind of investment, isn't it, defence spending? Because this is what John Healey, the defence secretary, told me before they won the election, and I think Keir Starmer's echoed this as well, is you rearm in order not to have to use the things that you're paying for, rather than in order to, be in a conflict. And so you're sort of investing in all of this hardware and personnel, but actually in the hope that you're not actually going to use it. So that return on investment is very nebulous, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a deterrent, I suppose. But on the return on investment point, I mean, they have spoken a little bit about this, about how it could be part of the reindustrialisation of the UK, and I would expect them to make that point to a much greater extent in the coming years.
And presumably they won't just be talking about exactly what level they're going to spend on defence at this summit. There'll be plenty of discussion about the wider situation in the Middle East as well. I mean, what other things are up for discussion, maybe? I
mean, I think the priority is going to be discussing how they can prevent Iran from resuming its nuclear program. I mean, we have a situation where there's potentially 400 kilos of missing enriched uranium. And Iran could really be compelled now to try and take its nuclear program underground, keep it secret, build a bomb completely out without any diplomacy, without any negotiations, in order maybe not to use it, just to have it as a deterrent. But I think Iran could see that it's very incentivized to continue on with the program, and we just don't really have any diplomacy going on to understand where they are at that and how to stop that. So I think that'll be like the matter of pretty top urgent priority.